Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulil Kareem. Dear participants, this is the monthly forum presented to you on behalf of World Council of Muslims for Interfaith Relations, WCMIR. Every month on the last Sunday, we invite a scholar to present a topic that invites our attention to some important issues. The format is that after the presentation is concluded, we will take all the questions and comments that are written in the chat box in order to offer maximum opportunity to all the participants. That is the format we are using. So if you have any comment, please write it down in the chat box. Same way, if you have any question, please write your question in the chat box. Once the speaker is done with his presentation, questions and comments will be read in the order that they are received. If you are new to our monthly forum, I invite you to visit our website, wcmir.org, to learn more about the organization. We are basically an interfaith organization trying to work on issues of common interest with other faith communities. Our speaker today is Dr. Abdullah Essen. He has a PhD degree from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And after graduating from the university, Dr. Essen has taught history, comparative civilization, and international relations in Pakistan, Malaysia, and Turkey for more than 3.5 decades. He now lives in Chicago. I am grateful that he has consented to present on challenges of modern education and responses of the Muslim Ummah. Please welcome Dr. Abdullah Essen.
Thank you, Brother Ahmad. I really appreciate that you have invited me to speak here. This is an opportunity that enables me to share my views on this topic. I think this is a very challenging topic and very relevant to our times. I will first explain the title itself. Arnold Toynbee, most celebrated historian of the 20th century, has a theory which says that history moves through challenges and responses. And challenges are natural to human life. And how human beings respond to those challenges make history. If they make progress, if they succeed in their challenges, they make progress. So I have chosen this title based on this theory that with the changing time, how Muslims have responded to modern education. Now, again here, we need to explain the meaning of modern. Depending on the topics and historians' background, modern is defined mostly in terms of European history's passage of time. I define our topic modernity beginning from the French Revolution. So challenges, responses to modern education. Objective of education, to my understanding, is Brother Ahmed, can you mute everybody else? Okay. Objective of education. Before the French Revolution, objective of education was defined like preparing a good human being, and it was conducted by the church. So churches were responsible to make good human beings. Of course, in ancient history, if you go to Greek civilization, for example, you will find that objective of education was to make a good citizen. But with the passage of time, it changed, and when the church took control, it was the objective was to make a good human being. And of course, in the context of Christianity, human beings were born with sin, and therefore they had to be corrected, and that is what education did to the society. Now, this church control of education was first challenged by Napoleon. You know, Napoleon founded France as a model nation state. And although the idea of nation state came after 1648, after the Treaty of Westphalia, nation state as a model came under Napoleon in France. Under Napoleon, there were national universities to conduct education, national educational policy. And also he established national bank, state bank. I mean, most activities which were not directly controlled by the state came under state control under Napoleon. And this Napoleonic model of nation state system continued since then. During the 19th century, rest of Europe subscribed to Napoleonic view of nation state. And in the 20th century, Muslim states followed. And as far as we Muslims are concerned, our educational objective of our education was defined by Macaulay. Macaulay was a liberal thinker, an East India Company official, civil servant, and he defined Indian education, objective of Indian education under East India Company rule. And at that time, East India Company was ruling only parts of what is Eastern India today, including Bangladesh. About modern education in our time, Professor Fazlur Rahman of the University of Chicago defined discussing about modern education, challenges of modern education. He says, I quote, "If there are today practically and indeed dangerously two nations in Pakistan, it is not only because the religious leadership has little contact with the demands of a modern society, but even more so because of the cultural bastardy of Westernized classes." So in my presentation, I'll try to examine this statement by Professor Fazlur Rahman. Now, going to development of education in Indian subcontinent, I'll come to the other parts of the Muslim world later, but giving the background of Macaulay's education objective. Education, of course, was independent. Most educational institutions were run by Waqf institutions. They were free from state control. But Warren Hastings was the first Governor General of East India Company's rule of India. He established Calcutta Madrasa in 1780. 1757, East India Company defeated the local Nawab, and then slowly they took control of the territory. And rule of the time was based on Sharia. And that is why Warren Hastings did not have a choice but to re-establish the Calcutta Madrasa. It was there, but he founded under his command to prepare officials for running the administration. And it was followed by Fort William College, again in Calcutta, in 1798. Mostly. Can we mute everybody else, please? Fort William College, started by Christian missionaries in Calcutta. And the official language of India changed in 1835 from Farsi to English. There is a misconception that Urdu used to be the official language. Urdu was never official language in the subcontinent. And in 1835, this is how Macaulay described the objective of his education policy: to create a class of Indian in blood and color, but English in taste. And I would say that he was extremely successful in his mission. And this is what you will see, what Fazlur Rahman said, cultural bastardy of the westernized classes. Now, I'm making a reference outside of the Indian subcontinent, but you will see that it is not different from what happened in India. In the Ottoman territories, educational reform started with this institution, a group of officials known as Tanzimat officials. They were mainly civil servants of the Ottoman territory, and they felt that Ottomans needed some reformation, and they established their system. But what is interesting is that Tanzimat leaders were all trying to copy Europe, and they had tremendous amount of pressure from European states to declare the status of non-Muslims within the Ottoman territory. And it is in the name of securing rights of non-Muslims in Ottoman territories, these reforms came. And you will see that if you study Ottoman history, you will find that most of the early reforms that happened in Ottoman territories were to satisfy the Europeans, not the Ottoman Turks. Or at that time, the whole Arab world also was part of the Ottoman territories. And this is what Fazlur Rahman describes about the Tanzimat leadership. Tanzimat reforms in Turkey, status of the minority that under Tanzimat leadership, gulf between the traditional and modern, the otherworldly and eternal, and this worldly and transitory came to be the gulf between elite and the Turkish masses. So what happened is that these reforms that the Ottoman administration conducted, they fundamentally created a gap between the common citizens and the elite. I remember a friend of mine who was Prime Minister of Pakistan at Prime Minister of Turkey at one time. He told me that his grandfather never sent his son to a school mainly because he felt that his grandfather felt that if he went to school, he will lose his identity, Muslim identity. So this is how the gap between common people and the elites started, the new elite that were established under the Ottomans at that time. And then it was changed. Ottomans were replaced by the Young Turks. And under the Young Turks, and then followed by Republican Turkey, the education policy, objective of the educational policy became the training of the youth to feel the honor of being a son of Turkish race, to respect the national flag, to protect the esteem of glorious Turkish history, to appreciate great Turks whose services have made the great Turkish nation, to be bound by the principles of Turkish revolution, to preserve, as Ataturk put it, and defend the national independence of the Turkish Republic. So this is how educational policy changed, and this is how, you see, I made a reference to Napoleon, Napoleonic France, and you see the same policy being adopted by some Muslim countries. This is an observation about Egypt. The secondary and university students learn surprisingly little in school about the political, social, economic problems of his own country. Even the BA candidate in political economy at the University of Cairo found his schedule crammed with such subjects as an Arabic adaptation of French constitutional law, the major in Arabic literature, concentrating on the ancient and medieval classics of the language, was no closer to reality. Efforts have been made at both secondary and university levels to rectify the situation. University economics and sociology programs, for example, both include a number of courses on Arab and Egyptian problems. A compulsory course entitled Egyptian Society, later named Arab Society, was introduced in the final year of secondary school and subsequently required for freshmen throughout the universities, higher technical schools, military academy. However, examination of the content of this course reveals little serious discussion of social and political problems, but a great deal of propaganda of historical mythology. When asked why historical chapters almost entirely, entirely ignored centuries of Ottoman rule of the Arab East, the co-author of one of the texts disarmingly explained that Ottoman age was a dark age, dark period in Arab history, and that he and his colleagues had decided to treat only the brighter periods. So this is how the educational syllabus went on. Describing the situation in Pakistan, not very dissimilar. Ishtiaq Qureshi, many of you would know him. He was Vice Chancellor of Karachi University for more than a decade and also was Education Minister for some time. And he says, it was Pakistan movement that weaned most Muslim youth from Indian nationalism and some from Marxist materialism. The enthusiasm for Pakistan created the feeling that all was well with Muslim youth. Even earlier, that was the general sentiment. A generation that had pursued the aim of economic welfare through the acquisition of new education and had remained Muslim in sentiment because of the tradition and influence of its parents and homes, thought that what had happened to it would happen to its children as well, forgetting that the Islamic influence grew more and more diluted because of the ever-increasing impact of new influences percolating through literature and immoral and religiously neutral education. The nature of education was such that the potentially positive influence that could have been exerted in favor of Islamic code of morals and beliefs was eliminated. And the subtle European suggestions conveyed through literature and textbooks were permitted to play their role unhindered. Similar situation in Tunisia. Here I'm quoting the situation in Tunisia by a contemporary scholar. Bourguiba approached religion and modernization and his wholehearted acceptance of Western values. Here again, you can see that Western values are understood as some practices only, not the real values. And he says the Sharia courts were abolished and ban on the hijab, all those things, you can read it. Even the Zaytuna school, the historically famous institution, was shut down. Sayyid Maududi was very critical of this situation, and he, of course, praised Sayyid Ahmad Khan for his attempts of educational reforms, but he was also very critical of the products. And here you can see again the same kind of observation that Fazlur Rahman made, that this education system has produced brown Englishmen, Anglo-Mohammedans, and Anglo-Indians. There is no compatibility, he says, Sayyid Maududi says, between Western and Islamic education and culture. And therefore he recommends first and foremost task is to review the Western humanities and sciences and to bring them into line with the teachings of Islam. I think this is very problematic. Problematic because here he is totally ignoring the positive values of Western civilization. Earlier, I have made this point that this author was saying that Western values. Where are the Western values? Western values, you see, ever since this thesis came up, Class of Civilizations, at the university where I was working in Malaysia, I was assigned to develop courses on rise and fall of civilizations. And when I studied other civilizations in history, what I found was that there are certain values which are common in every civilization. But for example, the aspect of transparency and accountability. These are Western values. But somehow Sayyid Maududi was suggesting that there is no compatibility between Western values and Islamic values. So I think this is problematic. Also, in his understanding, he has translated, if you are, I'm sure many of you are familiar with his Urdu texts, he translates secularism as la dini. I think this is problematic. To my understanding, secularism would be freedom of choice, like you can see in, choice of religion, the way it started in Europe. And if you're familiar with Westphalia agreement, you will see that they agreed to accept difference of opinion in terms of following which religion to follow. So this choice of religion, and here I find Immanuel Kant, the Western philosopher, German philosopher, very helpful, because Immanuel Kant was a believer, but at the same time, he is considered one of the founders of secularism in Europe. So I think this is what we need to work on now, that how we can develop common values between, among civilizations. And this brings me to this idea of what Sayyid Maududi was prescribing, was to review Western humanities and sciences to bring them into line with teachings of Islam. Islamization of Knowledge project, many of you are familiar with it, and the university that I worked for almost 3 decades also stood for this. And when I took this topic, I wrote to a friend of mine who has produced 2 books on political science, and he claimed this, I'm just quoting him, that Islamization and integration of knowledge have emerged as the niche area that distinguish IIUM, International Islamic University Malaysia, from other universities in Malaysia and in other parts of the world. And he has written 2 books, both are published by Western publishers and very well-received books. And he says that Islamic perspective of Islamization of knowledge. Here, I think our main problem is not that one should study Islamic scholars, be it Al-Ghazali or Ibn Taymiyyah or any scholars. Rather, it is giving the fundamental worldview. And to me, the main problem of this syllabus that we have been following is that political science particularly follows the man in nature theory of Hobbes. This Hobbesian view later was a little bit redefined and a little bit made more accessible with the works of both John Locke and Rousseau. But the nature has not changed. Hobbesian view is that man in nature is everybody against everybody else, a kind of chaos. My understanding is that Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, all of them understood this concept of man in nature at a time when there was chaos in society. If you study world history, you will find world civilizations. You will find that, say, for example, you are studying Egyptian civilization. Ancient Egyptian civilization continued for, say, at least from 4000 BC to 1000 BC, 3000 years. And during these 3000 years, there have been many changes. And if you open the textbooks on these civilizations, you will find that there are gaps. Say, for example, early pharaohs, medieval pharaohs, later pharaohs. And there are gaps in between. What are these gaps? If you study Greek history, you will also find that when Homer was writing his Iliad and Odyssey, he was talking about a civilization that existed 300 years before his time. And Homer was writing in the 8th century BC. And he was talking about the city of Troy that existed in 1100 BC, which was destroyed. In other words, there are many gaps. What are these gaps? These gaps are, you can say, sometimes some historians have referred them as dark age, lawlessness. And Hobbes, to my understanding, was referring to these lawlessness situation. And from there, he is prescribing that uh, that how one should establish good governance. And here one should keep in mind that civilization is integral part of good governance. No civilization can rise without good governance. And good governance throughout history, from your studies of early civilizations, you can clearly see that there are references to divine guidance. If you look at Hammurabi, the Babylonian king who lived around 1700 BC, you will find references to his law. His law was directed to good governance. So this is how civilization starts. But problem with our history texts is that on the one hand, they would recognize the role of religion, but on the other hand, they will see, they cannot see how religion has helped. Here, the main problem is the sources. The sources that we have about ancient civilizations. Again, I emphasize this point. I have emphasized always to my students that if you want to understand what civilization is, you have to understand Islamic civilization. Because Islamic civilization is the only civilization of which you know the founder of. Islamic civilization was started by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No other civilization in history was started by one single individual as far as sources are concerned. We don't know. We don't have enough material. We might have some information from the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt, some writings on the skins, but they don't give any information about how civilization had started. So these are some fundamental problems of our educational system. So I'll come to this point, but in the just before I end up my discussion on Islamization of knowledge, Dr. Ahmadullah referred to me to this Facebook posting of one sheikh in South India who runs a number of madrasas in South India. And he was very critical of Islamization of knowledge project. And he says that this has achieved nothing. It has only confused people. People should study the traditional madrasas, and he himself studied at Medina University, and he prescribes that. But here I think one should keep in mind that when I have encountered many of our former students, I think this project, Islamization of Knowledge project, and IIU Malaysia has achieved quite a bit, because wherever you go, I have visited Bosnia, I have visited Azerbaijan or Tanzania. In many countries, you will find that many of our graduates are doing very well. But that does not mean that our educational curriculum was successful. And we'll come to this point later. But again, I'll come to this point of Clash of Civilizations thesis, the challenge that came with the Clash of Civilizations thesis. You know that although the thesis is known in the name of, yeah, again, I think we have to mute everybody else. Although the thesis is known with, it is attached to the name of Huntington, the idea came from Bernard Lewis. And Bernard Lewis was a famous Orientalist. And if you are familiar with Edward Said's book, Orientalism, if you read that book and compare what Bernard Lewis has done, you will find a perfect example of Orientalists in. But here again, we should keep in mind that there are so many good Orientalists like A.J. Arbery or Anne-Marie Schimmel. They have contributed very significantly to the knowledge that we have inherited in recent times. And this Clash of Civilizations thesis also brought huge political challenges. You will recall it's only 20 years ago, many of you would remember that President Bush threatened Pakistan with this idea that if you are not with us, you are against us. And many observers felt that it was a threat to Pakistan. And it was at this time that Pakistan came forward to support the so-called war on terror by creating, by subscribing to this idea of war on terror, and to convince the Western audience. You can see Fazlur Rahman's statement, cultural bastardy. President Musharraf would appear in the television with his dogs under his arms to suggest to the Western audience that we are no less civilized than you. So these attempts of convincing the Western audience, and this came from this educational, so-called educational curriculum that we have discussed earlier, quoting Ishtiaq Hussain Qureshi. And this has created the problem of this, what you can say, pseudo-science or pseudo-religiosity. You see, the idea, I think I have mentioned to you earlier, how nationalism adopted educational policy to convince their younger generation that they have to subscribe, they will live and die for the sake of their nation. This idea of nationalism was now supported by so-called science called social Darwinism. And here I cannot escape quoting Muhammad Iqbal, the poet philosopher of Indian subcontinent, who came up with the idea of Pakistan. He was convinced that this social Darwinism was leading Western civilization toward destruction, what Nietzsche had said earlier. Nietzsche was criticizing Western God and Western worshipping of nation. And it was at this time Iqbal came up with the ideas how to encounter both the pseudoscience and pseudo-religiosity. And I'm now writing something on Iqbal's contribution to the so-called two-nation theory. And I can see that Iqbal was not trying to divide India. And this is again problem with the historians, that they say that Iqbal was a separatist. He was communalist. Iqbal was the opposite. Iqbal was a universalist. Iqbal wanted to bring civilizational unity through Tawheed. And it is only Tawheed, if you are a serious student of history, you will know that that is the only way that you can achieve unity of human civilization. And the problem that you see today in many nation states, that they cannot accommodate the minorities, it is because of the concept of nation state that came into existence, and with that educational curriculum that came to dominate our societies. Sorry. With this came this, with war on terror and pseudo-religiosity, disinformation, Islamophobia, Hindutva, and rise of extremism. You see, if you examine these ideas, what we have said about social Darwinism, which gave birth to white supremacy, and religious manipulation, pseudo-religiosity in the name of caste system, and Zionism. If you believe that God exists and God is just, almost every human civilization will claim that. And that claim does not go well with this problem with the birth. If you are born in a white supremacist family, if you are born in a high caste Hindu family, or you are born in a Jew, you are chosen. Yes, if you are chosen, I mean, you have a responsibility toward that kind of ideas that God has introduced for human society. I mean, looking at the Jewish community, and the Quran also says that "Faddaltukum alal alamin," addressing the Bani Israel. But Bani Israel was supposed to be a model community, how good servants of God should behave. But instead of serving that, they were only uh, promoting the idea that chosen people have promised land, you have to snatch lands by force. So these kind of ideas were all introduced in their educational system, and superiority complex was introduced. And also many Muslims became victim of inferiority complex to this. But that was now joined by misinformation. And I have put these names of some of the institutions. If you Google them, you will find that these institutions are geared toward uh, giving good information or bad information. Whether, I mean, when you study it, you will find, I mean, you don't need much of a guidance to understand that these are all uh, designed institutions to achieve some goals which are not always proper. And look at some of the scholars, like I'm bringing here Audrey Truschke. She has produced very good works on some Indian uh, scholar, I mean Indian statesman like Aurangzeb. And she says that she was never committed to any religious orientation. Yet, when she saw that a lot of historians were uh, describing Aurangzeb as uh, developing, taking policies discriminatory against the majority community of Hindus in the Indian subcontinent, she came up with a book challenging those views. And now she has produced more books, and she has become one of the main targets of uh, Hindutva uh, propaganda. Now here, to see what is happening in response to the war on terror and disinformation, all those things, there is a, I mean, particularly this Tony Blair, he has a foundation. And if you go to his website, you will find a lot of works, how they have tried to change the educational curriculum in the Muslim world. And he says that beginning with the first Arab Human Development Report in 2002, the need for educational reform was recognized by Arab thought leaders as a critical step for boosting development, stability, and inclusion, all of which came help combat the extremism. You see, of course, there was the rise of extremism in the Muslim world, but that was a response. That was not the action. It was a reaction against action. And this is what, this is how they tried to uh, change the curriculum. And I mean, you know that particularly in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, how educational curriculum was changed. And that is one challenge. Another challenge is, again, I mean, I cannot escape but to point out this Islamization of the Muslim heritage. See, what is happening in Afghanistan now, after Taliban came to power, there was the rise of this so-called ISIS Khorasan. And they will quote a hadith that an army will emerge from Khorasan with black flag and I don't know what not. And based on this kind of, I would say, I mean, I'm not an expert on hadith, but I have discussed it with Isra Ahmad Khan, who has written a very good book, which was published by IT, critical of some of the hadith collections. And I think we have to devote our energy toward that direction as well. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have challenges not only from Western heritage, but also from understanding of the Islamic heritage. And this is where we stand now. So I'll stop here. I have taken almost 50 minutes. So I think we should reevaluate our situation based on our experiences. Both we are subject to both Western civilization as well as Islamic civilization. And again, I will make a reference to my understanding of rise and fall of civilizations in history. You will find good values, good what I would call civilizational values, common, such as transparency, accountability, human dignity. These values common in almost all civilizations. And I think future lies on our efforts, whether we are able to cultivate those values for our future generations. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah Essen, for your presentation. I'm sure that many people may have comments or questions. Since I don't see any written question or comment, I open the floor. If you are asking a question or making a comment, I would request that it should be brief and to the point. So floor is now open. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, can you please introduce yourself first?
Yeah, my name is Azmat Ashraf. I live here in Toronto. I'm a retired sort of banker.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah, for an extremely illuminating sort of lecture. With respect to the education curriculum in the Islamic world, obviously the idea is to see how we can bring about the Islamization and integration of knowledge. Are there any particular sort of suggestions that you have with respect to this? Because when we talk knowledge, it is not just the theology or astronomy or nationalism or sociology, it's science and medicine and all those other things. I just leave it at that.
Well, if I am allowed to respond to this question, or you want to take more questions?
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay. Actually, there are efforts in many places. One of the efforts I have quoted, I was part of in Malaysia. There are efforts in Turkey. There are efforts in many other countries. I don't think that there is an easy way out to this, but I think what we need to open up to is critical evaluation with a good mindset. It is through this process, this integration of knowledge will occur. And I don't think that there is any easy way out. I mean, and again, the solution has to be found within this integration of all civilizations into the study. My personal objective now at the moment is to produce a kind of textbooks for freshman undergraduate students on introduction to human civilization. And that is where I want to introduce this idea. First of all, the beginning of human history. How did human history begin? Did it begin with one couple, or it was just jump from another species to human species at one time with many souls coming into existence at the same time? Our understanding of history suggests that if it were a group, it would have been very difficult to establish good governance. But as religions, not only Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, but also even in Hinduism and some other religions, you will find that there was an earliest human being. It started with one family. And that is how you can imagine that good governance must have occurred through the family institution. Families are fundamental to civilization. So I don't know whether I have addressed your question, Brother Azmat.
Yes, to some extent, and I think what you're alluding to, that use the universal values and
Right.
come up with something, and it's going to be a long journey, it seems, Dr. Abdullah.
It is, of course, it is not easy. That's what I'm suggesting all the time, that it is not easy, but we need to develop a mindset so that we accommodate everybody's ideas. And then, of course, when we accept some idea, we have to give it a chance.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please identify yourself and ask your question.
Yes, this is Aslam Abdullah from Los Angeles.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Essen, it was wonderful presentation and certainly very insightful. But have you come across a single curriculum or educational policy in any part of the Muslim world or in any Muslim institutions that is geared toward promoting the concept of Tawheed in the real sense of the term, not in the sense of talking about the superiority of Muslims or Islam, but in terms of integrating the knowledge as a whole, not dividing between religion and non-religion, anywhere in the Muslim world or in Muslim institutions all over the world. So in the absence or in the presence, I think of this factor, once we know those kind of things, then we can talk more about those things.
You see, I can talk about what has happened in the past. Say, almost more than 100 years ago, Muhammad Abdu in Egypt came up with educational reform of Al-Azhar. And he says that he was discussing the curriculum with one of the leading individuals in the institution. And he asked him, Muhammad Abdu asked him, why they don't teach Ibn Khaldun in their curriculum. And the response was plain and simple, that they did not consider Ibn Khaldun important for their curriculum. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is that attempts were made by Muhammad Abdu, and in recent times, Sayyid Maududi came up with the educational reform. And I think they were all praiseworthy. But they are all in the context of their own time. I don't think that we can adopt Maududi's recommendation at this moment. And I have already suggested some of my critical comments about Sayyid Maududi's policies. In our university also, at IIUM, in Malaysia. We tried. In the university that I was working in Istanbul also was geared toward it. It did not have the signboard of Islam, yet it was geared toward that. But you see, the unfortunate part of that university is that it was by decree stopped by Erdogan, because he thought that these ideas are not helpful to him, although he wants to be the champion of the Muslim world. And you will find even now, in many Muslim countries, there are so many followers. They think that he is a moral leader. And he was responsible for, shutting down this university. So this is the situation we are in. So I don't think that we can identify a single approach. What I am looking forward is that this combined thinking, we should speak out, give our views, and we exchange our views and start our experiments in different parts of the world. The world is wide open. You do experiments, and I'm sure that if you give it a chance, something will come up. I mean, talking about International Islamic University Malaysia, for at least 2 decades, it has gone very well. But then with the economic downturn in the 2010s, the university almost has collapsed. It does not have that kind of commitment anymore. So these are some realities that I'm pointing out to. I don't think that.
Yeah. Is there any book that gives a survey of Islamic education throughout the history, focusing on the curriculum and focusing on how various models were adopted by various countries or various communities?
I'm sure there are. I have to look for. I cannot name any book at the moment, but I think we can look for it, for this kind of books. Yes.
Okay, Brother Tanveer Azmat, you have raised hand.
Jay, so
go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Essen, for concrete and quite specific information and discourse. For the past 1.5 years, I have also been studying all the older civilizations because really the civilizational aspect of human identity, we cannot escape from it. And we know that, the people who are born in certain civilization, the impact of those civilizations are very deep, and it's not easy to remove those. So the problem I'm facing is that when we look at the civilizations or the known civilizations and the record we have, that record shows that the birth of humanity in polytheism and the theological narration points to that the humanity was born in the light of Tawheed. And, these two histories, they don't intersect. And that's a very, very big problem for me.
Yes.
Because that is the foundation from where we can start thinking about anything. That's one. And one small comment, as far as this idea of Islamization of knowledge, I think it's just waste of time. The reason is this, that physics studies concrete things that exist in nature. It's a study of nature. It's a methodology of studying certain kind of products which exist in nature. Okay, that methodology cannot be Islamic or non-Islamic. It's a method of knowing how a physical object behaves or what it is. As far as the theology or philosophy or religion is concerned, that deals with values. And no matter how much we can study nature, the nature or the universe, it does not have values. It is valueless. It's the human beings who assign and who generate the values. So the dichotomy between science giving us facts and humanities and religion and philosophy or theology, they give us values. And these are two separate things. So I don't know how you can Islamize physics or chemistry, because it's a method of study.
Well, if you have finished, I will take the first question first, because this is a very important question. That is why I referred in my presentation the idea of beginning of human history. I think that is the most challenging aspect. And after this thesis of Clash of Civilizations was introduced, I mean, most universities have introduced courses on Introduction to Civilization. Before 1990, the orientation of history curriculum was toward nation states, national hero, national achievement. And you will find that in Pakistan, they will take pride from Harappan civilization. Although it's funny, totally, absolutely rubbish to suggest that what Pakistan is came into being in the name of Tawheed, had some connection with the destruction of Harappan civilization or Mohenjo-daro civilization. So the point here is that we have a problem with the beginning of human history. And we have to address this. That is why I'm suggesting that I want to write this textbook. You see, in this connection, I have consulted at least 20 textbooks which are published by different famous American institutions. One of the textbooks has been produced by, anyway, one of the main contributor to one of these. They're all by a group of senior professors. A friend of mine who headed the Harvard Divinity School for some time, Bill Graham, was attached to one of the textbook projects. And he gave me his book in 2007 when I was visiting him, making a presentation on good governance. And based on that book, I communicated with him and I gave my suggestions, and he just disarmingly told me that it is not me who decides what to write. It is the publisher who decides. Just imagine the culture that we are in, that the consumer will decide the market. And there is no freedom of thought. There is no freedom of, giving these ideas. So that is why, you have to address this question head on, beginning of human history, with that it started with one couple, and Quran emphasizes it so much because it is very important. Unfortunately, our textbooks do not give any space to this idea, and these ideas are there, of course, but in the name of myth. And myth is condemned as opposed to the science of writing anthropology. And this is mainly anthropology which adjusted this. Now, the thing is that all these disciplines, again, if you study intellectual history, you will find that until 18th century, theology was part and parcel of mainstream science, physics and chemistry and biology and all the sciences. But in the 19th century, it was divided. And that is why Sayyid Maududi is right in the context of 19th century that it is la dini. Religion has been condemned in the 19th century. But if you go back to Immanuel Kant, I think you have a solution there. So this is how I would respond to your first question. And the second comment that you were making, that Islamization of knowledge has failed. Well, it started with, again, I don't want to go to that controversy who started the Islamization of knowledge project. But you know that in the United States, in IIIT was fond of this slogan of Islamization of knowledge. And then a time came, they gave up this slogan totally. So what I think we should do is to evaluate. I will not say that it has totally failed, but it has made some contribution, and we should develop new strategy based on that experience. Now, they are talking about integration of knowledge. If this integration could be integration of theology, philosophy, and science, all of them together. I mean, we never made a distinction whether Ibn Sina was a philosopher or was a medical doctor. He contributed to both disciplines. I think we need to develop, we should give up this compartmentalization of knowledge. And I think this is one of the steps that we should advocate. But so far, I mean, I produced a book on good governance, and I wanted this book to be listed in the index of political science or human sciences. But no, it was listed in theology. And I didn't like it because many people will not go to this book because it is theology. They don't recognize theology as a valid science. So this is the tragedy of our time. So we have to respond to this.
The thing is this, that theology cannot be a science. Science is a method in which you do observation and you verify.
Well, it depends on how you define science. If you define science as new knowledge, yes, it is a methodology, I agree. But I think, again, we also need to define these terminologies, what science is. In other words, I'm suggesting that we should open up our minds irrespective of disciplines. Compartmentalization must be given up and try to understand based on the experience that we have achieved so far. Thank you.
So I just want to thank at the end of this recording, before it stops, Dr. Abdullah Essen for his presentation and all the participants, and hope that you will continue to attend our monthly forum. It's organized on last Sunday of every month, and we invite a scholar to speak on a topic that may be thought-provoking or invite our attention to some pressing issues. Please also visit our website, wcamir.org, to learn more about our interfaith organization. Thank you very much.